Hello, and welcome to Activating the Self, a Psychosynthesis podcast. My name is Garrett, and I shall be your host. On this flagship episode, I'll be interviewing Jon Schottland. I met Jon at the Psychosynthesis coaching program that I'm enrolled in. He's the lead trainer and a heck of a nice guy. His background is in mental health counseling and has been psychosynthesizing for over 15 years. He's been a real inspiration to me and mentor over the last year of my own journey into psychosynthesis. In this episode, we get into how psychosynthesis has changed each of our lives, the general components of psychosynthesis, the self as the will, some practical exercises that you can try at home, psychosynthesis as the merging of Eastern and Western thought, the goodwill as how we connect to the larger whole, and the interplay between love and the will. If you're listening to this and unfamiliar with what psychosynthesis is, it's a transpersonal psychology founded by Roberto Assagioli, a contemporary of Jung. It's really the most complete map of the human psyche that I've come across, and I'm quite inspired to help share this practical and expansive system of thought. And now, on to our interview. When did you connect with psychosynthesis?
Let's see. I started my psychosynthesis training 15 years ago.
Yep.
So it was around 2003. And at the time, I had been working at in the public school system and working with young people and providing services that were kind of mental health oriented.
Yep.
And I wanted to get psychology training.
Yep.
So I had heard about psychosynthesis from some friends who were psychotherapists in Southern Vermont who had done psychosynthesis training, and they thought it would be a great fit. And I investigated a little bit, took a weekend workshop, and in the very first weekend, I thought, this is exactly what I've been looking for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I kind of had a similar reaction when I started learning about the material. I'm like, oh, something kind of clicked in my head, and it kind of overlaid this framework over things that I'd already been noticing happening within my own psychology, and I'm like, oh, that's it. It kind of was like it's a real missing piece of kind of the puzzle of kind of discovering myself. And as soon as I learned this stuff, it really clicked into place.
Yeah, the same was true for me. Absolutely. I thought, this would have been really useful to discover earlier.
Yeah.
But you find it when you find it.
True.
I mean, looking back on aspects of my life, even all the way back to when I was a teenager in high school, I can see that psychosynthesis in a way was explanatory, you know what I mean, for a lot of the things that I was experiencing but didn't understand about myself.
Right.
And helped me put those things together because I saw that there were so many different parts to who I was.
Yeah.
There were different elements in my personality, different interests, I had different kinds of friends. And so I wondered, who am I?
Yeah.
Who am I at the core if I have all these various...
It's easy to get lost in all that stuff.
Yeah, or to wonder what's the real you.
Yeah.
And then you come to find out that it's all the real you.
Yeah, right. We're so much more expansive than I think, we're taught, at least growing up.
Yeah, that's right. And it's easy to get put into small boxes.
Yeah.
Yeah, either in a role that we play or a job that we have.
Yeah. So kind of in 2003, as you started kind of journeying into this material, what kind of things did you notice happening? Did you just maybe like your life around you or like behaviors or, just like your day-to-day emotional state? Anything kind of specific that comes to mind?
I think there was pretty early on, there was a basic fundamental shift in terms of how I related to myself in my life. And I would describe that as a feeling that I could trust my own life and the experiences that I was having. That really I didn't have to figure anything out or everything out, and that I could trust what I was feeling, what I was thinking. Once I learned how to work with, in a psychosynthetic way, to process all the different experiences in life, I realized that my own experiences were trustworthy. And by that I mean whatever I was feeling, whether I was joyful or sad or irritated or whatever I was experiencing, my own thoughts, that I now had a process, an active, actual psychological process for working with the different elements within my personality and the different aspects of self. So I think that was a big shift, that myself as my friend, so to speak,
Right.
rather than, being conflicted or kind of tossed here and there by my own the internal movements of the self.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That for me was a huge part of like throughout my 20s was just going from one thing to another. And, people see you in your life doing that and you're like, wow, there's an aimless one right there. He's wandering around. But, I think a lot of that comes down to having these different parts of personality and then just getting sucked into their agendas and maybe following a path for a year or maybe more that isn't necessarily your best path, but
Yeah.
there's also still learning happening during it. So it's hard sometimes for me to look back and at these times where maybe I did kind of go off from, maybe what my best path could be.
Yeah.
And there's some kind of pain sometimes looking back at those moments of did I waste all of those years or were those needed to get to where I am now? Which is kind of something that I guess is, kind of front and center in my mind right now. But I guess it's irrelevant to really worry about that.
Yeah, maybe it's possible that there's a more direct route,
Yeah.
and maybe that's what psychosynthesis helped me with, and maybe that's what it's helping you with.
Yeah.
It gives you a more direct route to your own understanding of yourself.
Yeah. Helps you get out of your own way is what I found.
Yeah.
I felt
that's
like
right.
there was a lot of self-sabotage going on in my life, and this kind of explained why. Like, oh, there's this part of me that's not getting what it needs.
Yeah.
Cool.
And some of those explorations, not all who wander are lost, as they
True.
say.
Yeah.
Some of it are, some long detours it can feel like. Yeah. But I am finding that that's what I mean by being able to trust one's own experience, is that over time we can see that it's possible to use even those kind of dark night of the soul type experiences, those years that felt pretty painful and maybe drawn out a little too long.
Yeah.
And yet something within them, even within those experiences, something was always attempting to break through.
Yeah.
The self was trying to break through and find its way. And so psychosynthesis just gives you a more explicit map and process for seeing how the self is trying to break through all the time and present itself in a more complete, holistic, healthy way for us to live our lives closer to who the person is that we think we really want to be.
Yeah. Okay, so kind of zoom in on psychosynthesis a little bit more. If you had to divide it up into, general components, what would what's your view on that?
The general components. Well, there are a couple ways of answering that.
Okay.
I mean, there's Assagioli's classic egg diagram. So Roberto Assagioli, Italian psychiatrist, contemporary of Freud and Jung, who developed the theories of psychosynthesis throughout the 20th century. He basically portrayed the human psyche in 3 dimensions of an egg or an oval-shaped diagram, which represented the lower unconscious, the middle unconscious, the higher unconscious, as well as what he called the essential or core self, or I, that exists at the center of that diagram, that's also connected to one's own higher self, however you want to describe what that is, the source of direction and meaning and purpose in a person's life. So that diagram is certainly one way of thinking about the different aspects of psychosynthesis. And we organize our teaching program and training program a little bit around that, learning to work with those 3 different dimensions. And we can talk more about those at some point. The other thing that comes to mind in terms of how we organize the training program is that Assagioli identified towards the end of his life, when he was in his 80s, he outlined a basic training protocol with 7 core concepts, or even he called them facts or experiences. It really wasn't theory. These were 7 experiences that he thought were central to the process of psychosynthesis. So that's another way to look at how to organize a view of psychosynthesis, is what are those core experiences. Things like the principle of synthesis. You mentioned the will, the ideal model exercise, the experience of disidentification.
Yeah.
So the transpersonal dimension, all those different aspects are another way of looking at kind of the shape of psychosynthesis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, when I first started studying psychosynthesis, the first thing that really was probably the most salient to me was the idea of subpersonalities. I think that's probably maybe for most people, it's maybe an easy one to grasp, and it's kind of you can kind of learn it and see how it's interacting with your own mind. But lately, the deeper I've kind of got into it, the will seems to me one of the most important, and it's been the most useful to me. And so just kind of the will is, you mentioned the I, that is synonymous in psychosynthesis with the will. Yes?
Yes,
so
absolutely.
our true self isn't necessarily a noun, it's a verb. Like you say, we are all willing constantly. We're all willers.
Yes.
So we are, in a sense, the choices, the decisions we're making. Every moment we're making, from the smallest things to the largest things, we're all willing through life. So we're all moving through life with this I that's making these choices. And so I guess maybe speak to that a little bit, I suppose.
Well, right. So in psychosynthesis, one of the distinguishing aspects of psychosynthesis as a, quote, spiritual psychology is that it understands that we can represent our lives in terms of the content of what's going on. In other words, the actual experiences we're having, the feelings that we have, the thoughts that we have, the things that are happening to us.
Yeah.
But just like any person who practices meditation knows, there's also an observing ego or an observer witness who is aware of those thoughts and feelings and desires and longings. So that psychosynthesis recognizes that at the center of our life experience is this central I, or aware self,
or conductor
of the orchestra, so to speak, of the many different parts, and that's separate from the content of our experience. So I might have an experience of anger or an experience of excitement, and those experiences there's somebody who's attending, there's somebody home, this internal me or self who's aware of everything that's happening, my own reactions to things, so I can both react and be aware of those reactions. So in psychosynthesis, what's added beyond this dimension of awareness is also the will, as you've talked about. That essentially, not only are we aware, but we are available and able from this internal place of self to choose throughout the day, all the moments of our day. We are there to choose, not necessarily to choose and cherry pick what we want to feel or what's going to happen, but we get to choose and make decisions around how we are going to respond to the aspects of our lives and the experiences of our day.
And I think it's important to differentiate this, because I think in my past, I kind of revolted against this idea of will, and I think Asadjuli refers to it as the Victorian will, that kind of like get it done mentality, doesn't matter, and that's kind of like maybe like the World War II, like Great Depression, that era grew up kind of like my grandparents came up with this of you just do it and that's it. That's not the will that Asadjuli is talking about.
Well, that's only one aspect of it, he would say.
Well, that's the strong will.
That would be the strength of the will. Right. So, in fact, it is necessary to develop the strength of the will, but that's only one dimension. He also talked about the skillful will.
Right.
He talked about the loving will. He talked about goodwill. He talked about the wise will. So the will fully developed and matured over time takes on more than a, just kind of grind it out, push through aspect to what the will is. Although there is that element. But if somebody only has strong will, they're like a bull in a china shop. And they really don't accomplish their objectives because they're breaking things all left and right. And there's no sensitivity, there's no skillfulness. So the skillful will is huge, especially in psychosynthesis coaching. Because the skillful will allows us to do things like prioritizing, planning, deliberating and making decisions that serve our purpose. So by being skillful and reflective, the will is strengthened as well.
Like the work smarter, not harder is the skillful will.
Yeah. Now coming back to subpersonalities, which you talked about earlier. So when you start to see, Garrett, the connection, you look into it, you'll see the connection between subpersonalities and the will. Because people who are listening to this show, they could say, wait a minute, I'm making choices all day long already. I already choose. So people can be aware of that. But my life isn't really working for me, or I'm not getting the results I want. And that can often be because the will is available and can be captured by elements of the personality or these subpersonalities. So the question is not only choosing, but who is choosing. So when we're going through these, you talked about the painful episodes, I can look back in periods in my life, I can see that that I had kind of turned over command of the ship, so to speak, to a limited part of my personality that had a limited agenda and was trying to get me through the day. And so that part was making those decisions. You know, conceivably in my best interest, but really it's more of a survival orientation when you're letting those subpersonalities choose. So do we choose from a subpersonality, or do we choose from our deepest sense of self, purpose, and meaning?
How would people differentiate? Like, how do you know when you're making a choice from, you know, a subpersonality rather than from, you know, your highest or your most mature self?
Good question. Sometimes we don't.
Yeah.
Sometimes a subpersonality is unconscious. So it's kind of like if a computer program was operating in the background and you didn't see it, almost like a virus, and it was controlling the operating of the system. Versus being able to step back, recognize that a subpersonality, like let's say there's a perfectionist subpersonality that's telling me that I've got to get something just right before I can be done with it. It's got to not only be just right, it's got to be perfect. I can do whatever I want with this project as long as it's perfect, because every subpersonality has a limited script, and a limiting script. It says this has to be perfect. Or if it's a critical subpersonality, it's telling me this is bad, this is wrong. So all these voices are operating. So when the first step is awareness, to become aware that a subpersonality within yourself is operating. And the second thing is to accept it, to say, I have this part of me. I have this part of me that wants to make this perfect. And I know a more expansive part of me, a wiser part of me, a more sane part of me knows that it's okay the way it is, and that I have other things to do and other priorities, and I can move on. And so I'm, in a sense, there's a sense of seeing the subpersonality, because you have to identify it before you can disidentify from it, and then become free to operate beyond the constraints of the subpersonality. So you literally sense that the subpersonality is operating. Just like if you want to go get a pint of ice cream out of the freezer. You can just unconsciously go pick it up and consume the entire pint of ice cream. But it's also possible to recognize the impulse to go get a pint of ice cream. To go get a little saucer and put a small amount in the saucer.
Wait, how do you do that?
And override the dictates or the mandates of the subpersonalities. It's kind of I was listening to a Bob Marley song the other day, if you can excuse me, but he says, emancipate yourself from mental slavery.
Redemption song.
Is that what it is? He says, none but ourselves can free our minds. I thought, that's like psychosynthesis.
I see psychosynthesis everywhere now.
You do.
It's at play everywhere. Watching movies, I'm like, they're using their strong will and their skillful will. And, you know, it's like you start to see, as you learn more about it, you just see it kind of everywhere. Which, to me, is a sign of, there's something seriously truthful about this material.
Yeah, it kind of comes back to what I said earlier. I used the word, it's explanatory. It's also descriptive. That you actually, once you study psychosynthesis, it's very descriptive of your own internal experience as well as what you see going on around you. It's what you can see it in politics. You see issues like polarities and fragmentation in our political system, in our, around social conflicts. And you can see the identification that people have with positions and with size. That's why psychosynthesis can essentially reorient the psyche and, beyond that, the culture, the way people interact with each other, to see each other in a more true way rather than through the lens of some thought or limiting belief about somebody else.
Okay,
so it's very far-reaching.
Well, I mean, it's what's the word? It's like it's fractalized in a way. So it's working on this individual scale, then it's working in smaller groups, and it can just continue going up to scales of magnitude. I really feel that it's like it's a transformative kind of thought system. And I think that that's why it's not only that, but it's effective in just day-to-day things. I think no matter where you're bringing this into, it's going to have a positive effect. For a business, it's going to, personally, by using these, the experience of going through psychosynthesis, it's like unlocked more energy in me or something. As I've kind of disidentified from these subpersonalities and I'm kind of seeing where these things are coming from, I'm like, wow, I'm happier every single day. I'm more effective at work, and I just feel good about things. And I'm like, everybody should be doing this.
It sounds like it's freed up some energy for you.
Definitely.
That was there, but it was kind of latent within yourself.
Or that energy was being expended by just keeping up these, I don't know. It feels like there was energy at work doing things that weren't useful, but then you kind of, something like a dam broke and the energy just started flowing again. It's very interesting.
And as you would probably, my guess is that you would concur that it's that psychosynthesis is a life's work. It's not that you will come and train in psychosynthesis, it turns the key in the lock, and now you are just forever energized, upbeat, and happy. Because what it gives you are the tools to look at yourself, and so on any given day, to be able to say, wow, I feel pretty shut down today, or I feel kind of disconnected, or whatever it is, to be able to turn inward and confront the experience of the self, and to come back out with a little bit more sense of being connected and able to function in a way that feels more authentic.
And it's something that it energized me more to I kind of almost had hit a wall. I mean, I'd been meditating for years, doing these different things, and I still was hitting walls. But this kind of unlocks it, and I'm like so excited to explore it. And there's so much material, and there's so many people in this community that are using it in interesting ways. That's why I think people need to be hearing more about this. And I consider myself lucky that here I am happening to be living in like one of the largest psychosynthesis areas, that there is, which. It's
certainly in this country, in the Northeast, because the training program through the Synthesis Center has been operating for 40 years, and now the program that we're running over in Hallelujah Farm outside of Brattleboro, Vermont, is the continuation, essentially, of that program. So there are a lot of graduates in this area. There's a whole graduate community, ongoing study and practice, some local and regional conferences that are available. So, as well as there's a whole professional association, the Association for the Advancement of Psychosynthesis. So there are a lot of resources out there, even though it's a relatively, unfamiliar field of psychology to most people. When you tell the people about psychosynthesis, most of them are like, where'd you get that stuff? Or they hadn't heard of it before. But it's, I'm bringing this work into graduate psychology programs at American International College and Sophia University, and it's new and it's enlivening. And people really take to it because they can use it right away, both personally but also professionally. People in the mental health field use this work, and people are coaches, educators. So like you said, there's a lot of applications.
Definitely. So just I kind of want to give people some sort of maybe some practical thing they could do at home or something of value for anybody listening. A couple exercises that maybe people could do at home alone, maybe they don't have a psychosynthesis book or something that they're just hearing this. What's a simple thing that they could start with?
Great question. So one way to think about psychosynthesis is that it orients people towards purpose and meaning. And what is it? So people can look at themselves and look at their lives or even look at their day, and they can wake up and they can make a million lists of things to do. But in addition to that, being able to orient in each day towards what has meaning for you. So just asking yourself that simple question at the start of a day: how might I orient towards what's truly important to me in this day?
Yeah.
And that's often going to be a quality as much as a task.
Right.
So it might be, I'm going to orient myself towards kindness, towards compassion, towards, what would it look like if I were a little more generous today?
You know what that kind of makes me think of? I think in the act of will, Assagioli says acting as if.
Yeah.
Right? That kind of fits in there. So if you're orienting towards kindness, maybe you're not feeling it that day, but you act as if you were being kind.
Yes.
And then it kind of, the momentum gets started a little bit. That as if, I think, is an important part for people that maybe are feeling, terrible. You're waking up and maybe you have a job that you don't like, or, hectic, you don't have a lot of free time. But, if you start to act as if you were enjoying it, it really does, something clicks.
Yes, it sort of kicks in.
Yeah.
Just by you going through those steps and taking the first steps and getting yourself going.
Yeah.
You also talked about the will, so I was just kind of going through my mind and thinking about the will in terms of basic exercises that people can do.
Yeah.
So I would invite people to pay close attention to the kinds of choices they're making and the language that they are using. So, for instance, the difference between I should do something, like I should go to this person's party tonight, or I should go to this event. I should go grocery shopping today, or I really want to, or I'm going to try to do these things. All these partial expressions of will. And when you hear them, to begin to notice them and to step back and see if you can orient towards a more powerful expression of the will, which is, I am choosing to, and I will do these things.
Yeah.
Because then the person moves from feeling like they're the victim of their day to they are, like you said, the conductor, that I am choosing to. Even though I'm tired, and even though there's some other things I'd like to do right now, I am freely choosing to go do these other things.
I think that's powerful.
Or to take these steps.
Totally powerful, because I think there may even be some sort of analog in what's going on in your brain chemistry when you switch from receiving and just like, when you get to that mode when I'm choosing to do something, you're taking that first step. And it's empowering, even if it's something small. Like there's I forget where I heard it, but if the idea of making a bed has always been something like, well, why would I do that? Why would I make a bed? But if you get up and you're like, you know what? You pick something that you normally don't care about, and you're like, you know what? I'm going to choose to make my bed this morning. That little act of will has a cascade of benefits that happen all over the day. I think Assagioli gives an exercise of standing on a chair for 10 minutes for no reason.
Right, useless.
It's silly,
useless will exercises.
Yeah,
you call them.
I think that for a lot of people, for me included, I think has been useful. So I just pick one little silly thing to do, and I just do it.
Yeah.
Not because I'm, because I care about my bed being made, but just because this is an experiment in the will. That's how I've been looking at it.
Yes, yes, and you might even say that like the opposite of learned helplessness, which a lot of us experience, is active will.
Yeah.
Yes, is to become an active willer.
Yeah.
And to see that each one of us, like you said earlier, is at the core a willer.
Yeah.
And can be a very subtle and sort of gradually dawning realization that even to say to yourself, I am a willer.
Yeah.
And we can think, well, there's so many things that I have no say over.
Right.
That is true. But even a person who finds themselves locked away in a jail cell has a will.
Right.
And people have talked about this in not only in prisons, but in concentration camps. And Viktor Frankl talked about this, that the people who knew that there was one thing that could never be taken away from them, and essentially it was their own capacity to choose
Right.
how they were going to respond in their circumstances.
Yeah.
And you can take everything away from me, but you can never take my will.
Yeah.
The will is mine and mine alone
Yeah.
to manifest.
Yeah, it's easy to go to external influences as the reason why you aren't doing, A, B, or C. And maybe those are true, but you do have the power to choose something else.
Right, and that's where the skillful will comes in too. We are always free to choose from among the available options. Studying psychosynthesis doesn't mean you will magically have previously unavailable options to choose from.
Yeah.
You may have the exact same circumstances, and you probably will tomorrow that you had today before you learned about psychosynthesis. But your understanding of your own capacity and your own ability to choose from amongst the available options or possibilities, like you said, has a cascading effect. And a person becomes essentially to feel like they are a force or someone to be reckoned with unto themselves.
Yeah,
that I have activated my own self.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's a perfect way of putting it. That's how it's felt the last 6 months of doing this. I feel like I've activated myself. And I'm like, who is this guy? Where, I feel like it was weird because as I was going through the psychosynthesis training, for a couple-week period, I'd be wanting to listen to a particular type of music that maybe I listened to. That's all I would want to listen to from when I was like 19 years old. That's all I was listening to. Very abrasive music that I normally wouldn't be into at this age, but I've been like, I really want to listen to that. And it happened with a few different genres of music, particularly. But now that I've kind of reached this other kind of developmental place, I'm looking back and I feel like all these like other ages have kind of been unlocked in me. I can remember more from these ages. It's unlocked memories. It's integrating all these parts of myself.
Interesting.
I'm still like in the throes of it, so it's hard necessarily to articulate it.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's undeniable that something's happening. I mean, my wife notices. At work, they're like, well, what are you doing? And I'm like, psychosynthesis. And so it's like, and that's, I said to you, it's a performance enhancer. And I think that's a way that to get it into the minds of a lot of people where in a world where bottom line is so important with businesses, that this, it's a way to increase your revenue for a business.
Yeah, well, let me turn this interview around and ask you a question. So what does that look like? How does that happen for you? Because when I heard you say that the psychosynthesis is a performance enhancer, I intuitively said, yeah, that makes sense. But how would you describe what that means?
So,
or how that operates?
I think a lot of times for most of my life, I've let my emotions kind of dictate my performance. So I wasn't feeling good. I wouldn't be doing as good a job at work.
Feel bad, perform bad.
Right.
Got it.
So now I've kind of, and this is just one aspect, but I've kind of like, maybe I'm waking up and I'm not feeling so hot. I don't want to go to work. And I'm like, well, I'm going. I ultimately I do want to go to work because I like my job. I like what I do. I'm just having like a weird little emotional thing, and then it kind of drifts away.
Right, I get it. So the self is less deterred by all those little negative moments.
Right, and then my job is a big part is connecting with people. I'm going into people's homes and I'm having I do energy efficiency kind of stuff through what's called the Mass Save program. And so a big part of my success depends on whether I'm connecting with people. And I look at basically all my numbers at work get tracked, and there's a distinct upward line from when I started psychosynthesis to now. And I'm like, it's not a coincidence. It's just allowed me to connect more with people. And my relationship with my wife, I'm much more present. With my daughter, I'm much more present. And where maybe sometimes I'd be a little snippy or something, I'm way more measured with what I'm saying, less motivated by just the kind of the comings and goings of your emotional state, which I think that kind of gets into psychological functions, that there are all these things happening: emotional, physical input, all kinds of things.
Yes,
that is the content, but that is not who you are. We are the one that's choosing throughout all that noise
Yeah.
in a way.
That's really beautifully said. So you can separate out emotion and mood from how you're going to operate in that moment. Right. You're less a victim or a slave to those passing moods and emotions.
Yeah.
There's a different place to come to rest rather than in those negative or unpleasant states of mind. They're still there. Again, we can emphasize it. Right, but they don't rule the day in the same way.
And I will say
that's my experience.
That they come less.
And they come less.
It seems like they still, it still crops up. Like there's still a morning when I wake up and it's just not there for whatever reason. But instead of worrying about it, I'm just like, yeah, okay. So what? This is how I feel right now. It's gonna shift, you know. And these teachings also give you tools to shift it. Like I mentioned, that as if. Yeah. I'm acting as if I'm gonna go out and kill the day and have an excellent day. Yeah. And then it just halfway through my day, I'm like, well, things are pretty good, you know?
Yes.
And sometimes those days end up being my best days of performance when I'm feeling like that, when I push through it, and then as the day kind of shifts, and then I look back on the day, I'm like, wow, I really shifted things, and that's a good feeling when you kind of can overcome, you know, the emotional input.
Yeah. And being able to touch those difficult moments is a universal experience because all the people that you're connecting with also have their difficult moments in their day. And so the capacity to be with and sit with our own discomfort, like in a lot of the Eastern religions and spiritualities talk about mindfulness and meditation, that's a really important capacity. And so you take that and you position it within this larger psychological framework of psychosynthesis. And it gives you the capacity both to work kind of east and west, you know, with self and with personality.
Right.
And that was really part of the excitement for me when I found psychosynthesis, is that distinction between self and personality. So I recognize that I have this personality, I have this person that I show to the world and that has these different characteristics. And there is a self that is beyond just personality.
I guess we've kind of already defined the will. We've talked about how the will has different aspects to it: the strong will, the skillful will, the good will. And then you mentioned, and when those ones I'm familiar with, and I think we kind of defined them here. And I think, you know, goodwill is pretty obvious. You know, that means you have like a you know, there's like a beneficence to the goodwill that I think that ties into greater humanity, right? The goodwill.
Yeah.
So we connect into the larger kind of community.
Yeah. And I mean, it's something that we can look at on a surface level, but it also has a lot of depth to it.
Yeah.
On a simple level, it's what's the good thing to do? What's the good deed here in this moment? Whether it's holding open a door for somebody, allowing somebody in the line of traffic, you know, to recognize that other people exist. And that my life in part can be in support of other people doing well in life. It's like the goodwill at Christmas that you hear around the holiday seasons and around Christmas. Beyond that, there's a deeper sort of existential question of how is my life more than just for myself? How am I part of a larger whole? Because we can spend so much time analyzing and considering our own self state in any moment, right? It's sort of the psychotherapy couch culture, right? And that at some point it's useful and even necessary to get outside of oneself. So how am I, and where and when am I do I know myself as part of something bigger than myself? And that's also goodwill, because like you look at your relationship with your wife or with your kids, to the extent that I am contributing to the well-being of this other person, it impacts that person and it impacts me, because I am part of this larger system called my marriage. And I attend to that. So there's me as a self, there's my wife as a self, and then there's this thing that we are both a part of called our marriage. And then there's all these other things that we're a part of, whether they're communities or states or nations. and other nations, to see ourselves as part of a larger system.
Yeah.
Because in fact, we are, each one of us, part of a larger whole.
Right. We're all cells in an organism of some sort.
In the larger system,
Yeah.
whether it's the job or the institution. So instead of picking fights and becoming polarized with other people, and that's just, so you look at another person or another idea or position, and you see that as another representation of a self in this system of which I am a part. Right? And so we don't want to be, it takes us away from sort of a lot of the violence and ongoing conflicts to see kind of a larger picture. So I think that's an aspect of the goodwill, is to see,
that's interesting.
Yeah, is to see myself as part of a larger system, including nature and non-human experience as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. So what is my obligation to nature, right? And people are so concerned about the global climate change and the way human activity is impacting non-human species and the earth in general. So that's a way of thinking about goodwill.
Yeah. Goodwill takes you out of kind of the self, looking at the self, and how does yourself connect into the greater community and the different organization you're involved in.
And just to make it a little bit more nuanced here, is to be able, again, because all these ideas are interrelated, the goodwill is different from being attached to my own conception of myself as a good guy.
Okay, let's break that down a little bit more.
Right, so because if I'm attached to myself as the good guy of doing the nice thing for people all the time, then again, eventually that apparently benevolent impulse becomes a limitation at some point, because I am constrained and I must be the good guy in every situation. I'm attached to myself as the good guy. So the moment I do something that seemed like it was a little self-serving, I'm going to be all over myself. I'm going to be giving myself such a hard time because I'm so attached to being the good guy. And you know, nobody's the good guy all the time. Sometimes we have to be the person who delivers the difficult news. Sometimes we're going to say things other people don't want to hear. Sometimes there's a difficult truth that we have to tell somebody. It's not always going to feel like we're the good guy in every single moment. And so it's to get, psychosynthesis helps us a little bit get rid of good guys and bad guys. But the goodwill, as distinguished from a good guy subpersonality, the goodwill is the authentic impulse to contribute to a greater good and a larger, and to see oneself as part of a larger whole. And that takes us into a larger identification with people around us, with the world around us. We authentically experience their joy as our joy, their loss as our sadness. And we feel deeply, more deeply with others, which is maybe why your wife experiences you as more present. So I think the goodwill has many of these layers.
That's when I'm glad you kind of expounded on that, because that was one that's kind of it seemed I had an simplistic idea of it, but there is a lot more there, as with many things in the psychosynthesis. It seems like it could go, it's simple. It's like the guitar, simple to learn, hard to master. You know, or it's just one of those things that you can keep delving into, and it's like endlessly interesting.
And if people, again, wanted an exercise to practice with, just simply going through the day with carrying an intention to access goodwill. What would it look like in this moment, in this decision, in this conversation, if I were to access some goodwill? What would I do differently if I were trying to build up a reservoir of goodwill? And so it's like you said, sometimes you're just acting as if. It might be a moment where you could be just a little more generous with people in terms of even your time. Just taking a little more time to talk to somebody who's having a conversation with you. A little more time sitting with the dog in the morning, you know, whatever it might be. And so psychosynthesis, so it's this process of consciously, again, orienting oneself and directing oneself towards what feels like a richer, deeper life for yourself. So those are some of the ways I think about the will. And then
you mentioned the love. I mean the wise will and the loving will. What, could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. You know, Assagioli talked about what he saw in people as sometimes a polarity or a dichotomy, however you want to describe it, between love and will. And what he saw is that people who were often more warm and loving seemed to have a less well-developed will.
Wow.
And that people who had a stronger will
Yeah.
were more, by and large, less warm and caring. That he saw that people tend, not that they were without the other aspect, that there was a polarity between people who were on the more loving side and people who were more willful, action-oriented, manifesting. So you can think about people who are climbing the ladder, who have that entrepreneurial spirit, maybe get ahead by getting on top of other people.
Right.
You know, that the will is driving them in a way that is lacking some of the basic empathy, warmth, and loving side of human nature. And that people who sometimes have that loving, warm side and caring side can be a doormat, and they don't have enough oomph. They don't have enough will developed to support whatever it is so, you know, that they want to do. So what he suggested is that people look at a synthesis, as in psychosynthesis, the synthesis of the different parts of our personality. So there's a chapter in the Act of Will about love and will, and he suggested that people work on developing the lesser quality within themselves. And so there's the basic practice looks like this. Whenever a person has an experience of that feels like it's love or warmth or care, whenever we have a sense of that experience, to consciously bring in the will. How would the will complement my experience of love, warmth, and care?
So let me pause you there and give so I'm sitting on the couch with my wife, and you just look at I would look at her, and I'm overcome with this feeling of love and warmth.
Yeah.
Then how would I, in that situation, how would the will be brought into it?
You might just become aware of the will, that you might recognize, I am actively choosing to love and care for this woman.
Okay, rather than
not only do I have love as an emotional experience, but I'm grounding it in my own sense of will and choice. I am choosing this person. I am actively choosing to love this person the best I know how.
Okay, that's interesting.
And that I will give expression to my love by knowing that I am choosing to love this person.
And so that's meant to strengthen the will. Yes?
It complements and it becomes the loving will. It's a synthesis of love and will.
It's like pulling, so you have this emotion, the energy or this intangible feeling of love that we get.
Yeah.
Or we have. It's taking that energy in a way and kind of moving it into the will and kind of bolstering it almost.
Yeah. And he also said that we can look at choosing towards and actively cultivating the higher aspects of each quality.
Yeah.
So for instance, love could show up as jealousy or possessiveness.
Yeah.
And so how do we use our will to cultivate the higher aspects of what it means to love somebody?
Yeah.
And the same thing with the will. Conversely, when we have an experience of will, how would that be supported by and complemented by bringing in this other dimension of human nature, which is the loving, the warm, the caring? So the will allows us to get stuff done. It allows us to manifest. What would it look like if that were complemented by generosity, care, goodness? And then by bringing those elements together, and you can look at examples in our culture, like somebody like Martin Luther King, combined both love, deeply loving, and deeply powerful as a willer, and did what needed to be done despite his own fears about what was going to happen to him and his family. And so you become, the synthesis of love and will is a tremendous power. It's like a force of nature. Yes.
That's amazing. That's really interesting, actually.
Yeah.
I don't think I quite understood that until now. And then you mentioned the wise will. Is that?
Yeah.
Would I be accurate in saying that maybe the loving will is kind of like kind of related to the good will, and the skillful will is related to the wise will?
I think the way I think about the loving will is the synthesis, like I was saying, of love and will.
Yep.
But it could also be seen, the loving will is related to goodwill, I would say. The wise will is the integration of the strong, the skillful, and the good.
Okay.
So if a person has a very strong will, a very skillful will, so the strength of the will means they have the horsepower, so to speak. They have the force. They've developed their will. Skillfulness means it's going to be deliberately used for intentional purposes. So, and then the goodwill means that it's going to be deliberately used with strength for the good of the many and for the good of the world, not just for myself, not just for selfish purposes. So that essentially requires or involves the development of wisdom, of making choices that are going to make a difference in other people's lives because they're based on good, skillful, and strong will. Yeah. Great. And that's one way to think about wisdom.
Well, that's episode 1 in the books. Thanks for listening. And thanks to Jon for sharing his time and wisdom with all of us. If you'd like to learn more about psychosynthesis, or if you'd like to be a guest on the podcast, please email me at activatingtheself@gmail.com. That's activatingtheself, one word, @gmail.com. I wish all of you the best. Until next time.